Welcome back to the Student Pilot Cast. Thanks for being here as usual. Today we're going to get back together with Nick Smith from Part-Time Pilot, an online ground school platform that we first talked about over 2 years ago back in episode 64. So let's get going on episode 80 of the Student Pilot Cast, Back to Part-Time.
Chandler Tower, Cherokee 4121 Tango is at Chandler Air Service. We have Zulu, and we'd like a south departure, please.
One does it set to be an angel? Where does the sun go when it sleeps? I should by now. It isn't written in my stars.
So like I mentioned before, we spoke to Nick back in episode 64 about his ground school, but a lot has changed since then. He's added both features as well as programs to his school, so let's get to the interview pretty quickly. Before we start it though, I want to mention that we recorded this a couple of months ago when this is released. Since then, I've completed my CFI. I finally got to do my check ride in mid-November, but when we spoke, I was still waiting for a date from a DPE to get it scheduled, so we'll talk a bit about that. As usual, please reach out to me if you have any questions or any suggestions or any feedback of any kind. You can find me via email at bill@studentpilotcast.com or on X using the handle or name there at Bill Will. That's Bravo India Lima Lima Whiskey India Lima. I guess I should also mention our very unused Instagram account too, which is Student Pilotcast. So that's pretty easy to find. I guess I should start putting content out there, on Instagram, but I just haven't done anything really there yet. You can also use the contact form to get a hold of me. It's on the website. You can get in touch with me like that. Any way you do it, though, just do it. While I do get behind sometimes, it might take me a while to reach back out. I do love hearing from you, and I will almost always respond. So I guess we can drop into the conversation that Nick and I had. So here you go. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Student Pilot Cast. We're so happy to be reprising our episode that we did with Nick Smith over 2 years ago. Nick, can you believe it's been that long?
No. That's crazy.
So Nick Smith runs an operation called Part-Time Pilot. And we actually did, here I am in the middle of our discussion, and I forgot to look up what episode number that was.
I was trying to look for it as well just before we started.
All right.
Oh, 64.
64. And we also had a video episode on there, but I've changed the way we're doing that a little bit. So yeah. So it's episode 64 of the Student Pilot Cast was when we talked about Part-Time Pilot for the first time. So Nick, it's been over 2 years. What's new? What's new with Part-Time Pilot?
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. A lot is new in 2 years. I can't so we have, the big thing is we have an IFR online ground school now.
Yep.
That was one of the things that I think I had talked to you about starting to create it at the time we talked last. So that's up and going now. We have a mobile app now. So that's been really fun to build, and we have a great app builder who's doing that for us, and it's really cool. It's got, an E6B tool, like a practice test generator where you can pick, the categories you want to do practice tests, and that's all free. But then students of our ground school that log into that get extra features. So they'll be able to go through the ground school lessons, listen to our audio lessons, watch the videos, take the quizzes, and then they'll also be able to download a lot of our bonuses. So that's really cool. We're still working on updates right now, like it doesn't sync progress with our online. So that's a big update we're working on. So it's a work in progress, but it's been really fun to get into the app world.
Gives the students access to some of that training on the go, I guess, a little bit easier for them to access. Is that kind of what the idea is?
Yeah, so I held back from a lot of people asked if we had an app and like they wanted an app, and our our course is already 100% mobile friendly.
Right.
You just need the internet. So that's why I held back. I was like, I'm not really sure what the app would do. But then I started speaking to an app developer, and they were saying, well, there is possibility that we could, um, have it all stored, right when they download the app, it kind of stores all the information.
Mhm.
And then eventually, and again, this is another feature we're working towards, but students could use it offline as well. And then so when they get back online, any progress that they had made offline would kind of resync with their course online and everything. So that's kind of what we're working towards. And that to me is the big bonus of having an app, right? Is having that ability. Let's say you're on an airplane or whatever, and
Imagine
the
that.
Wi-Fi doesn't work, right? Yeah. Well, like a commercial plane. And so you could you could pull that up and get some studying in. So yeah, basically, like you said, on the go, and then the offline thing is big.
Yep.
Because believe it or not, we have a lot of students that like. I'm surprised at how many students we have that they're not always in an area. I live in a city, but they're not always in an area
Oh,
with
yeah.
a solid internet connection.
Right.
So yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think I also noticed that you guys added check ride prep. I don't think you had that 2 years ago.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. It's hard to remember, but yeah, we have a check ride prep course. We've added a lot to that. I've kind of built, it's really about kind of exactly what to expect. So it's like in the same step by step, like, you meet with your DPE, you're going to give them their money because they want their money first, right? And then they check your logbook and your IACRA, and then you go over the plane stuff. So it's like all that step by step to really just get you feeling confident and comfortable about what you're going to see. And then since then we've built, we've put in like throughout, we review everything in that same sequence. So, but then we throw in like green text that kind of stands out in the course, these like situational based questions, oral questions that you might get, and then the answer that we think you should give. So we have over like 300 of those thrown, and those are kind of the money things that people really, really want for a check ride prep, is to know what they're going to be asked on the oral and kind of how to figure out what they might be asked, based off their scenario or whatever. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So that's kind of the stuff that's new. For those listeners who haven't had a chance to go listen to that other episode, how about, Nick, you give us a synopsis on what part-time pilot is and, where you're headed with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So part-time pilot started after I went through my private pilot training. And so I have a background in aerospace engineering, and then I was a flight test engineer. So I was all around airplanes. And so the knowledge was there, and I wanted to get my pilot's license. And when I was going, I was actually kind of a natural. I'm not trying to brag, but like I got through my flight license relatively quickly at the beginning. And then I decided to move from Seattle to San Diego, and then take a couple months off. And then I was paying paycheck to paycheck. And then I went to I didn't really understand Part 61 versus Part 141. So I switched to Part 141 school, then had all these extra requirements I didn't understand. I essentially made a bunch of mistakes from my lack of understanding of how the flight training world worked. And it got really, really frustrating. And I spent, like $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 more dollars than I really should have if I just had planned ahead and known these things. Mm-hmm. So I started like an Instagram based off trying to educate people about the way the flight training works. And then started looking into more what it would take to be able to have an online ground school. And so I became a ground instructor. First I was just basic for, private sport and recreational. And then now about a year ago, I got my IFR rating for ground instructor. So for our IFR course, and then started just building the ground school. So that's kind of how it started, out of that wanting to educate people and kind of save some people some money. Cause I thought if it's that hard for someone who has the just who's always around planes and has the academic knowledge behind it and all that stuff, then no wonder so many people are failing and finding it too hard.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it started, and that's kind of why the name Part-Time Pilot came about, because I thought, look, there's so many people out here who they want to make the dream either a career change or they just want to achieve the dream of flying, but they don't have just a ton of money where they can just like stop working or like stop taking care of the kids and just like focus on that. So we all kind of start off as this part-time pilot where we have a full-time schedule, and then on the side we're trying to make this career switch or whatever. And so it was sort of, I wanted to tailor everything to that person that is trying to do this on a limited schedule, busy schedule and limited amount of time. So that's why we have, like I was talking about, the mobile app, right? That's exactly in line with kind of our goals and then we have audio lessons so you can listen to ground school stuff on the go. Everything we kind of add is kind of with that in mind to make it easier and more efficient for students to learn the content.
Interesting. And I just learned something I didn't know. To be a ground instructor for an instrument rating, I guess there's additional training?
Yeah. So there's just like kind of a flight instructor, there's different ground instructor ratings.
Okay.
So it's basic, instrument, and advanced. Advanced is like, now when I went in for my instrument, the person was like, why didn't you just do the advanced? And then you could, because advanced is like, you can teach everything. And like, once you've learned a lot of it, once you've learned kind of like private and IFR, like
all the FOIs or the fundamentals of instruction are all the same. It's really about the specific technical content.
Right. Exactly. So, but I did it piecemeal. So I did the basic one, which allows you to teach private, sport, and recreation. And then I did IFR. And then, eventually I'll probably do advanced as well. And
that'll let you do commercial, CFI, multi, stuff like that?
Yeah, and even helicopter as well.
Oh, okay. Rotorcraft is in there too.
Kind of it's kind of everything. Yeah.
Cool.
At least that's how I understand it.
All right.
I haven't looked too much into the advanced one, but
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna ask the obvious question. I know last time you weren't really ready to do that, didn't really think that's the direction you were going to go, but have you reconsidered maybe becoming a CFI?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Yeah. Still just
focus on the ground instruction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I like teaching the ground knowledge. And just a time thing, I can reach more people teaching the ground content than I can, flying with one person. And then for me, it seems a little stressful.
You don't want somebody trying to kill you every day?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, but I don't knock anyone that does. I mean, we need flight instructors, so thank you for doing that. But I don't think that's for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. All right. Well, I noticed that, and we've talked about it a little bit, that you added instrument. Plans to add more. The reason I ask is it seems like there would be an opportunity for your students who are maybe going on to advanced ratings, even beyond instrument, to kind of grow with them or allow them to kind of grow with you. So are you thinking about adding some of the other certificates and helping your students kind of continue on? Is that something you're planning on?
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's we go the commercial route before maybe we do rotorcraft like you talked about, I kind of go with the flow of what the people are asking for. And that's why I went IFR. So many people were asking for IFR. I haven't got that many people asking for commercial, but I know it'll come now that we have IFR. But I guess it makes sense, right? The further you get, kind of the less people that are actually making it that far.
Yeah.
So eventually, right, I want to have it all. I want to have rotorcraft and commercial.
It's just a matter of prioritizing which ones come first, right?
Right, exactly. So, but yeah, that's definitely in the works right now. After doing the check ride prep and the IFR and then releasing a couple of books, I was like, I wanted to pump the brakes and just like focus on just like polishing everything up and just making, I always have ideas of like how to make the course better, and I'm always getting feedback. So I'm just taking last few months and a few more months to just kind of polish it all up. Right now we're redoing our audio lessons in the private pilot course, because when we recorded them, since then our lessons have changed just a little bit. I've gotten better at explaining things, so I've changed that in the written lesson, but I haven't had the time to update the audio. So I'm going back to update the audio, make new videos. Now we have some videos with animation, so trying to get more animation, just things like that. That's just polishes it up, makes it even better. So that's kind of what we're focusing on now, before we just throw more products at people.
Right. No, that's great. Yeah, I've noticed as I've been teaching and practicing and things like that, that you polish up your presentation for certain subjects based on, I've got a better story to tell here, or I've got a better analogy to use here that gets through to more students, things like that. That's kind of what you're running into, right?
Oh, 100%. Like one of the ones that I've changed many, many times, and you have to tell me a little bit about what you're doing now with the teaching, but like the temperature pressure effects on the altimeter, right? And
yes.
The reasons why that happens and the confusion around that. Just as confusing as it is to learn, it's even more confusing to explain.
Sure. Yeah.
But I finally have found that I have a good way of explaining it now, but it's taken multiple iterations. You know what I mean? And like you said, analogies to do that. So
I don't even actually remember that being in the private, but I got my private so long ago, I probably have just forgotten. But I remember kind of having to relearn that when I was doing my instrument, or maybe it was my commercial. Right. I don't know. I don't even remember.
And then also maybe you just learned high to low, look out below.
Yeah. Maybe I just learned how to pass the test, but I didn't learn how to explain it. Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of a dilemma I have too. It's like, okay, for these private students, do I want to just have them learn this for now? Or, I know there's going to be those students that are like, well, why does this happen? And it's like, do we want to go into the weeds? Because it is very weedy, that subject. So I always kind of play with that dilemma, because there's so much to learn. Like, do we want to, obviously it's good to learn it's good to learn more, but you want to look out for their time.
Well, you've just touched, Nick, on probably my biggest challenge in teaching that I've discovered about myself. And it wasn't that big of a shock. I'm a bit of a nerd who likes to dive into a subject because I want to know everything about it. And so one of the big challenges that I face is not going too deep with somebody who is just learning, And so it's really kind of an art to be able to get across the right amount of information that is accurate, correct, but doesn't confuse and doesn't overwhelm a student before they're ready for that. So I totally know what you're saying. I could do a ground on fundamentals of flight that would take 2.5 hours, but nobody who's learning first about the fundamentals of flight is going to be able to sit there and take in information for 2.5 hours. And it's not something, they don't need all of that detail to get their certificate or pass the written. But if I'm with somebody who's also interested in going deep, that could easily happen. And so I think that what you're doing, trying to find that balance, is not only difficult, but really important for the learner. And what you're doing is hard too, because when you teach one-on-one or even one to few, you can sort of gauge where people want to go. You have to do it where it works well for a large number of people. And so I'm wondering how you how you navigate that, because that's totally different than say how I would do it, say in a one-to-one scenario. And so
Yeah.
is it just a lot of feedback from, by the way, do you call them your customers, your users, your students? What do you call your users? Are they students?
Students,
Okay.
yeah.
So do you have a really like close feedback loop with your students, or how do you sort of navigate that? It'd be interesting to find out.
That's an amazing question, and only one who kind of understands this space and teaching it too. So I've never been asked this before, but it's such a good question, and it's not easy. But I'm trying to think of the best way. So you asked if there's a close feedback loop, and yes, absolutely. I told you kind of before that I try and go with the way of the people. I find that having that community.
So you're going to be running for Congress soon then? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. So having that that community feel and kind of, and that's one other thing we try to do. We try and bridge the gap from like online to like in-person instruction. So like,
Community
what is it
is really
that's great
important.
about? Yeah. What is it that's great about the in-person instruction? Well, it's being able to reach out when you have a question and getting that question back quickly and kind of understanding where you're at along, kind of like a mentor thing. And that's hard to do with a lot of people, but that's one of my, I think that if we can do that online, we will stand out between everybody else. If we have that one feature where we feel connected to the student, they don't feel like, oh, here's a bunch of PDFs and videos. See you later, right? Good luck. So having that close feedback loop is great. And always, like just the other day, I had a student that was really, really thankful for, they were like, hey, like, in this video you talked about, you can, if you do a certain amount of hours per day, you can get through ground school in a month. And I was wondering, like, what lessons would you recommend I do each day? And I had already had like this calendar thing. And so it gave me this idea, well, like, oh, I'll just put each lesson on there so that they can just check it off. And so I did that real quick and I sent it to her. She's like, wow, this is so cool. Like, you actually listened to me. And I'm like, yeah, like you guys have the best ideas, like, because you are actually going through it. So that close feedback loop, and then just having different options, I think would be the other way, and just trying, and this is what's hard, is trying to communicate that. So like, for example, in our lessons, we have the audio lesson at the top, we have written, visual aids and like diagrams throughout. And then we'll have a video at the bottom and then a quiz, but also at the bottom, we have a test prep summary. And the reason I added that test prep summary is like, sometimes there's some students that are just, no matter how much I try and tell them, it's good to understand the fundamentals of the concepts and what's behind them and not just rote memorization. No matter how much I say that, some students are just going to do that because they're running out of time or whatever. So I have that option in there for them. But the difficulty of having all those different options, right? Whether you want to listen to it, watch the video, some students, and I was kind of like this, that if something's like given to me, I'm like, I have to do it all.
And it can be overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly. So trying to say like, hey, just do what works for you. The quiz at the end is going to tell you what you need to know pretty much, right? So take the quiz, and if you pick which way you want to learn the best, and then take the quiz. And if you're lacking there, then look into then watch the video maybe, or then one cool thing that we added since the last time I talked to you about, because AI came about probably since the last time I talked to you, right? Now we have AI. So and this was a lot harder to do right when it came out, but I wanted to be at the forefront of this. And so I built like all these things called like vectors and fed it into ChatGPT. And so basically it was like a prompt and a response. And I made from every single lesson prompts and response that students might have, and fed that to ChatGPT to like train it on our content. And then, so it took so long. And then now OpenAI, I don't know if you're familiar, but now you can just upload PDFs.
Yeah.
So it's like way easier. But on every single lesson, we have an AI that we've uploaded all our PDFs and all the FAA PDFs to. And so it has that context and they can get a quick question. It's not meant to replace us, so they can still reach out to us. But I guess long story short, just having all those options and just trying to communicate to them, like, use what works best for you. But there are all these options for you if you need it. So
Yeah, I can see that being a pretty big challenge, being able to strike that balance. So yeah, I appreciate that.
yeah.
Do you still have your perfect pass rate?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a challenge of growth.
Yeah, exactly. We've had 2 people that I know of who didn't pass the exam. And then both of them were like, no, this is on me. I don't want a refund. But I was like, hey, our policy is to refund you if you don't pass. So I'm happy to refund you. And then they passed the second time. But yeah, we didn't. It didn't give. I knew it was going to come, but yeah.
Well, good. That just means you're growing. You've got a lot more students. Because sometimes people have bad days or they're just not ready. So it happens to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And yep. I was just say, so why don't you give me a little update since the last time we talked? I know that, like, did you start IFR training, or is that something?
I did. Yeah. I did that just a few months after we talked, actually. So I started my instrument rating. Well, first I had to, get current again and relearn how to fly an actual airplane. Start refreshing my book knowledge, things like that, because I'd taken quite a while off. But then, and this is pretty well documented in the podcast, but then back in January or February of 2023, I started my instrument rating, did that, got my commercial. Then I took a few months off of training, and I forgot to mention, back in that same time period when I started my IFR training, I left my longtime corporate, technology job and started doing some other things, and started the training at the same time and doing all these things. But then I got my commercial, and then I did my CFI. But I kind of finished training for my CFI about 4 months ago. And I've literally been waiting this whole time to get a check ride. And it's still not scheduled.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's like, I'm hearing that everywhere.
It's pretty nuts. It's a little frustrating, but I try not to let it bother me. I'm just excited so all of the training I've been doing has all been sort of in a mock way as my preparation or training. So I've led a couple of discussions with private pilots under the supervision of my CFI instructor. Since I haven't passed my check ride yet, I'm not a CFI. So I've done some of that. I've done some where we get together with other CFI candidates and we teach each other a subject, so we can kind of go through the lesson plans, kind of learn how to teach it. Then I've also been doing the same thing with my. I have 2 adult sons. I have 3 adult sons, but 2 of them are interested in aviation in one way or another. I have one son who's already a private pilot, and he's planning on getting a bunch of his other ratings. And so I've been teaching him, doing grounds with him on commercial maneuvers and things like that. And then going out in the airplane and flying with him. So I always fly right seat now, just to make sure that I stay in practice,
Yeah.
And so I've been, as a private pilot, unfortunately, when he's the sole manipulator of the controls, I don't really get to log the time because I'm not a CFI yet. So that's a little unfortunate, but he gets to log the time. So that's cool for him. But I also have another son who works in aviation, but he's not a pilot. He's going to become a mechanic, an airplane mechanic. So he's starting school soon, and he's got a job with an aviation company where he does a lot of their groundwork. And so I've done the same thing with him where I'll teach him, you know, ground lessons because he does want to get his private pilot eventually. And then we'll go out and fly. And in that case, I get to log it because he can't. So
Right. Nice. So, man, are you guys? It sounds like you guys need to start like
I know,
aviation
right?
business. You guys
I know.
got all of it right
I
there.
agree. Yeah, it'll be super cool. But yeah, it's kind of dragging out. I'm excited to begin teaching because I've always thought I would love teaching. I mean, I love teaching in general, and I've taught many other topics in different, aspects of my career and my life. I've done seminars, I've done, one-to-many, I've done one-on-one teaching, and I really enjoy teaching. I think I'm kind of good at it. And so I'm really excited to take two of my passions, teaching and flying, and merge them together. And I really enjoy it when I've been doing it with my sons and when I've been doing it with the other students of the school. And I'm really excited to get going on this. And I'm just held up by this technicality that I can't get, my check ride scheduled.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping sometime in November, cross your fingers. I'm working with 2 or 3 different DPEs to get on their schedule. I still can't get on the schedule. Literally been trying for 4 months. So
what area are you at again?
I'm in the Phoenix Valley.
Okay. Have you looked
lots of training gets done here. So lots of,
Have you looked at like flying to somewhere?
Yeah. And in fact, one of these DPEs, while still sort of in the Arizona area, would be a ways away. So I've been looking at that, but yeah, if this doesn't pan out, I'm going to have to start broadening and go to Dallas or San Diego or who knows, go somewhere else where I can find a DPE because it's really getting kind of ridiculous. But I'm trying not to let it bother me too much. I'm just excited. I'm excited to get started and start gaining more and more experience from the teaching side. And I'm just really looking forward to doing it. I think I'm going to love it.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Good for you. Now, do you think that the reason for the DP shortage is a shortage of DPs, or are there more students that are needing?
Yeah, this gets discussed a lot, and I would not call myself an expert in this, but in the discussions that I've had and been privy to, I don't think there's a shortage of DPEs. I think it has to do with a lot of things. One, not all DPEs are either eligible or willing to do CFI initial. It's a very long check ride.
Yeah, that's true.
It does take special qualifications and certain amounts of experience to even be qualified to do it. And so you can take all of the DPEs, and I don't know what the figure on this, but it's possible that only half of them, or even less than that, do CFI initial. So that's part of it. It's always been hard throughout my recent training to schedule a DPE. But it's never been this hard. And part of that, I think, is it's just harder to find somebody who's doing that. And then the DPEs who are doing that are generally not full-time DPEs. In fact, a lot of DPEs aren't full-time DPEs. They hold other jobs in aviation usually. And whether that's they're running a big flight school, or they're airline pilots, or any number of things that they're doing, they don't do check rides full time. And so that hurts too. They may only have 2 slots a month where they'll do a CFI initial, even the ones who do it. And then third, I think that we've sort of got a bubble in the pipeline of students or pilots because most of the airlines have either completely stopped or slowed hiring. So maybe there's people that weren't planning on becoming a CFI, and now they're kind of like, well, I can't get a job in the airline, so maybe I'll become a CFI. There, any number of things. And so I think there's additional training going on because they're not moving on to other jobs in aviation because, we're just in one of those little bubbles where it's backing up a little bit. And so I imagine that, and a whole host of other things. Like I said, in my region, because of the weather and because of, I don't know, for all of the various reasons, Arizona is just a training mecca. And so
Yeah.
we do have a lot of DPEs around here. But we also have a large number of students or candidates for various ratings and certificates. So I don't think there's really a shortage. If you look on the rolls, so to speak, there's a lot of DPEs, but some of them just don't work that much as a DPE, and then I think some of them probably don't get that much work because while most are probably incredible, I haven't met most. I think there's also DPEs that people avoid like the plague because they're just not very good, and so.
Yeah.
I think that's an exception. But I don't know, for whatever reason, it's just been very difficult to get this one scheduled, more difficult than the other ratings and certificates that I did.
Yeah. Yeah. That all makes sense to me. Especially like you said, the CFI. Yeah, that makes sense. But I've even heard it hard for private.
Yeah, it is.
Lately.
It is hard and
yeah.
it takes a while, but it doesn't, it's not 4 months to even get on the schedule. I mean, yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
But anyway, it is what it is, and we just deal with it. We go through the process, and I'm excited to start teaching more and more. So,
Yeah. That's awesome. Very cool. Yeah. Thanks for the update.
yeah,
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. I think you'd be a good teacher. I haven't heard you teach, but I think the way you articulate things, at least, is good. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love this stuff. I mean, part of the reason I love teaching is in general is because it always makes me more of an expert in the topic, because you always get questions that you wouldn't have thought of yourself. You have to be prepared for questions. You have to, like you alluded to before, understanding something kind of and explaining something are two different skills, two different things that you have to do. And being able to explain something to two different types of people, I mean, many different types of people, but two major categories of people who don't understand it at all, and then people who kind of understand it but need that second depth of knowledge, or they need somebody to help them get to where, they really get it. Not just the, from the FOIs, it's, going beyond that rote knowledge and really correlating the information. It's amazing when that kind of happens for yourself, but I find it even more amazing when you facilitate that in somebody else. It's very exciting and invigorating when you see the synapses created in somebody's mind. I mean, not literally see them, but you see the correlation happen, and they go, "Oh, got it." And it's just really cool. And being able to do that requires a level of knowledge of the topic that you might not get unless you teach it. And that's one of the reasons I'm a sucker for knowledge. And when I kind of understand something, but I don't know all the details about it, it bugs me. And so part of the exciting thing and part of the reason that I love teaching is because whatever the subject matter is, I mean, I used to do it back in college, like with physics courses and stuff like that. I would teach other fellow students about a really difficult upcoming test, because I knew that if I taught it, I would nail it, And so it's just fun. It's fun to be able to do that, and it's going to make me way more knowledgeable and comfortable with my own knowledge. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it'll make you a better pilot. But I always tell students the best way to learn and study is to learn it as if you were having to explain it to somebody else. Exactly. Because then you really have, and I use the term, have you heard of first principles thinking?
Yep.
Yeah. So I always try and break down the concepts when I'm creating a lesson. And I'm like, okay, I want them to actually understand this concept. So what are the first principle kind of fundamental facts that about this concept that they absolutely need to have and know, that'll set the foundation for being able to understand sort of any sort of rote memorization question, even if they didn't remember it, right? Because it's just because they understand, they can still work it out logically because they understand those core principles or whatever. So, but yeah, and you reminded me of have you seen that curve of like, it's like, on the y-axis, it's like confidence in your knowledge. And then on the x-axis, it's like how much experience learning it you have. And so it's like starts at a bachelor's, and like after your bachelor's, your confidence is really high. And then if you get like a master's level, like the more you learn
Your
about something,
confidence goes down.
yeah, the more you like realize you don't know anything.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've had many personal experiences about that throughout my life on all kinds of topics. And, in my professional life, in aviation, all of it. And that is very, very real for me. And I have talked to my fellow CFI candidates as well as my instructors as I've been going through this process about this very thing, because I'll just sometimes shake my head and go, here I am, a CFI candidate. I've been flying for 15 years, off and on, but I've been flying for 15 years. And how did I not realize what I just learned right here?
Yeah.
It's like, this seems so basic. I can't think of the example right now, but it's happened multiple times where I'll just shake my head and go, okay, we know nothing. Like it takes a lot of experience and a long time to start building that confidence back up, because the more you learn about a topic, the more you realize how little you know, and how small we are in the scheme of things.
Yeah, it humbles you. Like when I first started like teaching, making videos and stuff, like I was like, I have to make sure that people, that when people watch this, they think that I know
it all.
absolutely
Yes.
everything and I'm perfect in this video. And then now I'm to the point where like, oh yeah, I could totally be wrong. Like, please tell me, like, let's hear, like,
I actually,
I've been wrong many times.
I actually think that probably helps you connect with the students better, because it's more, it's more familiar to their experiences, even things outside of aviation, things that they're experts at, they will get that, and so I think it makes you more human, able to connect better, and thus more trustworthy, and probably helps you teach more effectively. One of the things that I've been blessed with is most of the time to have instructors that when I ask a question or I bring up a topic, or you know how it is when aviators are sitting around, it'll often go to, hey, what if, or what about? I've been blessed with instructors that would always go, I don't know. Let's figure it out.
Yeah.
And
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that is way more, I guess that builds a lot more trust than trying to make something up, or, oh, that's a dumb question, or, some other way of replying to hide your ignorance of the topic. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. And like, yeah, you make an amazing point. Like if they think, when they look at the syllabus of what all they have to learn, and they just get kind of overwhelmed, and then I'm over here acting like
everything. Yeah. It's like,
it's really easy. Like, where you don't know it. They're going to be like, so just like, I'm blanking on the word, but
discouraged.
Yes. Yep. Thank you. They're going to be so discouraged. But then, like you said, if I come at them and I'm like, oh, that's a great question. Yeah. I don't know, but I know how to figure it out. So let's go figure it out. And
I know where to find the answer, or I know, exactly.
Right.
And the other thing is, one of the things I've noticed, the further along I've gotten in my training, is, again, you'll take this amazing instructor who you kind of feel like has so much experience that they know everything, and they'll readily admit, oh yeah, I forgot what all the words in that that memory aid are. It's one of the ones from private or something, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh yeah, what was the A standing for in that mnemonic? And
Like a tomato flames or
exactly.
something like that.
And I'll go, oh, thank goodness, because I forget all of these all the time.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of knowing kind of what it means and where to find it, and being able to refresh your memory. And I find that so much more approachable and less discouraging. And I think most aspiring aviators or aspiring anything, that's probably more approachable, less discouraging, and it helps you connect better and teach better. So yeah, that's good. That's funny that you bring that up, because that curve that goes down as you know more, because that's something I've run into so much in my own experience. So
Yeah, and then like doing it online too is a bit of a
true.
they say like if you want to have the best like inner work, just try to become an online entrepreneur, because you get all these like faceless people commenting on your stuff and saying whatever. Like YouTube is the worst. And like some of my first YouTube videos were, pretty low production quality and things like that. And I made mistakes, and just hearing it from the, anonymous
The
crowd
peanut gallery. Yeah.
is you get a thick skin, and you realize that, it's better to not act like you know everything, and just
be real.
be open.
It's way more connecting.
Exactly.
Yep. I totally agree. It's one of the things I hear about from my listeners on the podcast all the time, is that they appreciate me like airing my mistakes. Because it's real easy and tempting to go, wow, what a bonehead move that was. Maybe I don't put that out there in the ether for everybody to laugh at me. But it really is better for people. Again, I keep saying this word connect, but I think that, as you alluded to earlier, community is really, really important, especially when you're doing something online, because there's not a natural community there. So it really does help build that trust and community, because again, they go, oh, I make tons of mistakes. I'm not alone. Like, Bill made tons of mistakes, and I did, and I still do. I still make tons of mistakes. And so I just think it's more fun, it's more human, it's more real. It helps you connect, and I think it helps people learn. And most importantly, I think it helps people not get discouraged and quit, because there have been times in the last 2 years where I wanted to just go, you know what, there's other things I could do. I love flying, but this is too discouraging.
It can be very discouraging.
Yes. And am I really ever going to get good at this? Or am I really ever going to get this? Or am I ever really going to remember this? Or whatever it may be, it can be really discouraging. And the thing I like to let people know is that is the experience for basically everyone. And if we all make sure that everyone knows that, it's much easier to go, well, it happened to this person I really looked up to, this instructor I had who I really admire. It happened to them. I can get through this too.
Yep. Yeah. One of my best performing YouTube videos is where I just talk about my story about how I paid way too much for
all your screw ups, right?
For all my screw ups. Yep. And it's the best performing one, because people are like, all the time, they're just like, oh my God,
I totally
can't
relate to that.
Someone else is going through this. Like, this makes me feel so much better. And it's like, So
yeah,
and that's a big draw of your podcast. That's the big draw, I think, of your podcast, I remember after the first episode telling, my students to go and listen to it, because exactly what you said, and the feedback that you get is you're just real, and you go through the journey, your own journey, and then people can learn, but they can also just kind of relate
Yeah.
and just not get discouraged.
And right now in the podcast, I'm near the beginning of my instrument training. Those are the episodes I'm releasing. By the way, remind me to talk to you about Beyond the Check Ride that I've been doing. You'll love this. But yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. And I look back on that. So, and I did this in the early part of 2023. So what editing and releasing these episodes is doing is letting me relive that and going, oh man, that was a pretty hard rating. It was a lot to learn. And I was just coming back into aviation after a multi-year hiatus. And many of the terms and concepts I didn't know at all. I knew of approaches, I knew of departures, but I really didn't know any details about them. And so it's been interesting to be able to go back a year and a half and go, wow, I really sucked. But I still do, because I don't fly instrument very often. Once you go to your commercial, it's basically like a private pilot check ride on steroids when you do that one, right? You're basically doing none of that. And so I've been staying current. And so, with my instrument. And so it's pretty funny, because without doing it all the time, it is a very, very disposable skill. Like, it goes away really, really quick. And it's so easy to get behind the airplane, flying instrument when you're not doing it all the time, like seriously difficult. And so I'll go up with my son, who's a private pilot. He'll be my safety pilot. And I'll go, hey, I want to knock out 3 approaches. I want to try and get current. And I'll get done with that. And not only am I exhausted, but I flew like the worst approaches you can imagine, trying to get down to minimums and trying to correct and not get, whatever it is. And I'll come back just completely emotionally beat up, because I was so bad at it. It was so hard for me to stay ahead and do everything that I'm supposed to be doing just on a simulated IFR approach. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So is that what you would say was the hardest part? Just staying ahead with all that you kind of have to track and do?
I don't think that's the hardest part. I think the hardest part was collecting and retaining all of this new information, and then being able to, and that's what made it hard to stay ahead of the airplane, is now all of a sudden there's a whole lot more to do. And I wasn't doing this with an autopilot. So you're talking hand flying, instrument approaches, when you're kind of new to all of this, briefing the plate, because you're doing this single pilot, even though you're sitting with either a safety pilot, an instructor, or an examiner. You're doing this single pilot. They're not helping you do it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you're acting like you're single pilot. And I mean, single pilot, if you're an actual IMC, single pilot approaches without an autopilot, that's no joke, man. I mean, that's not something, it would take me a long time to feel comfortable doing that in real IMC. Now, where I fly, we don't get a lot of IMC. I'd have to come out to San Diego in the spring and summer to get IMC down to minimums. We just don't get it here. If we've got IMC conditions down to minimums, you shouldn't be flying, because you're probably in the middle of a thunderstorm or a microburst. But or a haboob, right? But
yeah, that's true.
So it's not like I'm probably gonna be doing that, but I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. It takes way too much practice and experience, in my opinion, to do single pilot IMC to minimums without having done it a lot in the last month or two. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even if I did it a lot for a year, because maybe I got a job somewhere where I was doing it like every day, and then I came back here and went for a year without doing that, I wouldn't do it. It's way too much load. So
Yeah.
doing it with a safety pilot or an examiner or an instructor where you're simulating single pilot, it's just as hard. It's just not as dangerous. Right. So
Right.
that is the
Yeah.
time to do it. But the reason I wouldn't do it is I think it's too much unless you're doing it all the time. Because
Yeah. 100%.
you really have to be almost an autopilot in and of yourself. You can't be thinking about what's next. What next has to come naturally. So that's what I found the hardest part is all of this new knowledge. The test, the written test for that, you're teaching it. The written test for that it's not easy because it's a whole bunch of new concepts and new ways to think about stuff that really has nothing to do with the private pilot exam that you just finished, generally.
Yeah.
And
so
yeah, go ahead.
Do you want to finish?
Oh, I was just going to say, but then adding to all that new knowledge, having to fly quote unquote single pilot IFR down to minimums with a whole bunch of different approaches all in one day.
Yeah. No.
It's exhausting, and it's not exhausting physically. It's exhausting mentally and emotionally because you're behind the airplane or almost behind the airplane.
Right. You're always just trying to keep up.
Yeah. And as soon as you go missed, you're like, the examiner, if it's a check ride, the examiner says, all right, well, let's set up for, and you're like, I barely got through that. And now I got to twist, turn, I got to do all of the stuff now to set up for this next one and do all of this again with a different type of approach. It's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I was curious to ask, because I heard this during my private that, when people talked about IFR, whether or not you should get it or how, I feel like there's this almost belief that because IFR is a little bit less hours and stuff in terms of the training, that it's easier. Or I remember thinking that it's it's a lot being told that, oh yeah, it's a lot easier. You'll get it done real quick. It's fine. And
it
then
is
when
quicker. It can be quicker.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. But to say that, but I feel like a lot of students kind of think oh, the ground is just going to be, easy peasy.
It's all
I'm
new
just going to be
stuff.
relearn.
I mean, not all new. I guess some of the weather stuff is just building on what you did in the private, but it is new stuff. I mean, you're going to, be diving into icing. You're going to be.
It's all about the details.
It's all about the details.
IFR.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's right.
And it makes sense because if you aren't detailed and you're not on, you're not flying the right speed, you don't have the right turn rate, and you're flying IMC,
you can't see anything.
yeah, you have to be on the details. Yeah. And so
I think it makes you such a better pilot. And part of it, honestly, part of it is you realize, like we were talking about before, how little you know and how little experience you have. Because one of the things that you do as part of the instrument training is, not everybody does it, but I think it's an important thing for an instructor to do, is, hey, close your eyes and follow my instructions. Yeah. All right, do this. Now just make a nice level turn to the left, make it, and you realize, man, I have no idea what attitude I'm in. You open your eyes and you're in some wacky attitude, nothing like you thought you would be in. And it's kind of like, everybody's probably done that as part of their instruction. It's very illustrative, but it's kind of like that across the board on all the concepts you have to know about flying. Is you start to realize, man, I thought I was this big bad pilot. I am this, I'm this little baby just learning how to do some of this stuff. And I think that alone makes you a way better pilot,
Yeah. the humbling part of it. Yeah,
But then
absolutely.
also just learning all these new concepts about weather, learning all these new things about how to read forecasts that you just brushed over before.
Right.
Understanding, people talk about how, the private is really kind of learning all the basics about a little of everything and getting good enough to start learning, right? And then you get your private, then you do your instrument, and it's really kind of a whole different set of concepts. And then you go back to commercial, and it's like taking all that stuff you did in private and really learning how to control the airplane. What some people miss is you kind of really have to learn how to control the airplane in instrument, because you're going to have to learn how exactly, what it takes exactly, what power settings it's going to take to get a 3-degree descent along your, whatever instrument approach you're doing. If it has vertical guidance, for instance, you're really going to have to, how do I set the airplane up to stay on this ILS, or, on, and,
And then
and
or your wind changes, right? You get a different
correcting for the
headwind, and
wind,
now
and figuring out that you've got to go past a couple of degrees, and then, oh, that's taking me left, of course, so I'm going to come back a couple of degrees, and kind of nailing in based on the wind where you've got to be to stay on that localizer or stay on that GPS path exactly when you're doing an approach. And by the way, you have to do that while managing your descent rate, and while making sure you don't get too low beyond where you're supposed to be at that moment in time. Oh, and while you're doing all of that, brief the plate. Well, you would have briefed the plate before that, but you got to do that. And then while you're getting ready to come in, you've got to stay, you got to keep doing your announcements on the CTAF, or, if you're not, if you're no longer with approach, or if you're doing practice approaches at a non-controlled airport, you got to make your CTAF calls, and it's a lot. It makes you a better pilot because you're doing a lot more with a lot less information coming in. You're not just looking out of the airplane. It makes you realize how much information we discern from our eyes while we're flying. And now all of a sudden you don't have that. So you got to be putting your eyes everywhere inside the cockpit and putting your mind everywhere. You got to make those CTAF calls while you don't get off of your descent, or you don't bust your altitude that you have to stay at wherever you're at in the approach. And, all these little things, it just makes you do more with less information and with less time. And it makes you a better pilot for that. I think everybody who's a private pilot should get their instrument rating, honestly. I don't think it should be a question, because it will make you a better pilot, even if you never fly in the system. In my personal humble opinion. Yeah.
No, I would agree. And I was just recording before we started this audio lesson on in the IFR ground school on flying the glide slope and localizer. And I was just thinking, as you're going through, and you got to do this, and you got this, and I was thinking, oh yeah, and as you get closer to the ground, the localizer gets more sensitive.
That's right.
It's like just like this.
It's harder to
test,
hold. Yes.
Yeah. It's like, geez.
Yeah, and not just the localizer, but the glide slope too.
Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah.
Yep. That is correct. So I've got a question for you. This might be a challenging question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
What do you think, with both of your ground schools that you've done so far, what are the most challenging concepts or topics that you've had to cover, and maybe the ones you think about revising all the time because they seem to be challenging for your students?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So VORs.
Yeah,
I think is VORs, HSI, when you get into instrument. Those are always difficult for students. They were difficult for me, when I learned them.
Well, I was going to try not to interrupt you, but now that you said that, I've got to.
Oh, no.
So with the VORs, don't you sometimes do this little thing? Because this happens to me too, especially in the airplane. You're trying to teach somebody or show somebody, oh yeah, this is how it works. And then all of a sudden you go, wait a minute. Oh, yeah, that's right. I got it right. Because even now it's like the reverse. I don't know. You can always get yourself sideways pun intended,
No, yeah.
with the VOR.
It's one of
where you
those
start to think about
things.
it too much, and then you're like, wait, did I just mess that up?
It's one of those things that no matter how, and it's why it's why people hate VORs and why at its core, even though we still are going to use it and the FAA is going to keep a minimum number of VORs because it's a good
That's right.
backup. But even though all that's true and we have to learn it, it is a fundamentally kind of a poor system because no matter how much you know or how smart you are, you can still screw it up
Yeah.
because of that just easy oops. Oh yeah, no, it's actually this way. Like the reverse sensing stuff. Yeah. So that's always difficult. Density altitude a little bit, right?
Mhm.
Just the concept in general, like wait, when do we use this altitude? Why do we care about this? Wait, it goes up? Like I don't get it. And so density altitude is a tough one. For what else? Oh, I mentioned the one before, just the effects of temperature and pressure in the atmosphere and how that
Oh,
relates
yes.
to
Yep.
your altimeter. That one's always confusing, and the altimeter as well. Like so, when you change your altimeter setting and you're increasing it, like what that does to the indicated altitude, that's reversed to if you're actually sensing it, right? So like if the pressure goes up or down outside and that's what your altimeter senses, it's going to change. If
Yep.
the pressure goes up, it's going to
It's
go
easy to
down,
get
right?
yourself reversed on that. Yep.
But then if you are inputting it, it's not the same thing, but because you have to teach people that when you're changing that, you're changing the reference to the actual pressure. So there's an equation kind of that, your altimeter is taking the difference between what you're setting as the reference altitude and the actual one. So just concepts like that you got to get to the bottom of
Cool.
are the toughest ones. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, anything you want to tell the listeners about the site? You got any discount codes going on right now? Anything like that?
So we have a lot of free resources, like always. And one thing we started doing, so I ultimately, right, my goal the whole time was to be, in terms of value and price, we have the most value and we're still at that lower price level so that
you don't need the discounts.
Right. You don't need the discounts. It's just there. It's less work for me, right? I don't have to do all these campaigns and stuff. So I believe that we're there. Obviously, we're not perfect. And like I said, we're polishing it up, making it even better. But we do one discount. And I kind of call it like a kind of a kick in the butt, get you going, encourage, action for people. So when people get our free resources, whether it's like our how to become a pilot and save money email course or our free study guide, if they download that free resource, which are on our website, parttimepilot.com, we give you an offer for the first 3 days.
Okay.
You get $50 off. So it's just kind of, it works for me. It's a good marketing tactic as well. You kind of put a time limit on something and people will act more a little bit, but also, it kind of, promotes action and getting the ground done. And one question I was going to ask you, if we can, in IFR, did you do ground school before you flew, or did you do it at the same time, or how did you?
I did it. I kind of did it before, but I was flying while I did it. So
Okay.
I was kind of engrossing myself in aviation at the time. And so I was flying three or four times a week. And then when I wasn't flying, I was finishing up. And it was because I was going fast at the beginning. And normally what I would do, and what I kind of did for CFI, was I did my 2 tests, my ground and my 2 tests beforehand, and then kind of started flying. That's what I would normally do. But for my instrument, I kind of did them at the same time, but I finished my tests. I took both tests. I took the CFI-I at the same time because it's almost the same. It's almost exactly the same content as the instrument airplane. And so I took both those tests early on in my flying, if that makes sense.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. So, because with private pilot, we always recommend students do ground school first and get that base knowledge.
Yep.
It's just you're gonna have more time to just focus on flying. You're gonna be more ahead of the aircraft, things like that. But with IFR, it's a little bit more, especially if students go straight from private to IFR, it's a little bit more difficult to tell them to like stop flying and do the ground, because you want to keep that momentum.
That's right.
Like you said, it's a skill that if you don't use it,
And you're going to
lose
learn
it.
something on every flight anyway. Yeah.
Right. So it's a little bit harder to do with IFR, but I've been telling students to, maybe continue flying and start your IFR lessons, but maybe maybe start a little slower on the flight lessons and give yourself a time to digest some of that ground and the procedural stuff.
If you were flying twice a
really,
week for private and then you achieve your private and you want to go straight into instrument, maybe fly once a week for a couple of weeks while you spend all that extra time on studying and doing the ground school and taking the test, and then go back to 2 times a week or 3 times a week, something like that. I think that's a great strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, this has been really fun. Thanks for having me on.
It's been fun to catch up, Nick, and you're doing great things over there.
I need to get a better studio background like you have. You got the backlight and all that stuff. I got Halloween decorations.
Hey, man, it's that time of year.
Yeah.
I like it. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us, and I'm sure we'll catch up in hopefully it's not 2 more years, but in a little while, and you'll have some additional offerings on the site. So,
absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, keep it real and keep showing your mistakes and being real. And I think you're going to keep doing really well. So thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, that'll do it for this week's episode. Remember to reach out to me however you decide to, and stay tuned for a bunch of new stuff hitting the feed in the coming weeks. By the way, I am so glad to have completed my CFI. I haven't started teaching regularly yet, but what a ride that was. Someday I'll have to do an episode on that epic check ride. But that day is not today. It was fun and I learned a ton, but I'm really glad it's over. Even an old guy like me can learn new tricks, I guess. Remember, if you just stick with it, you can become a pilot, or a better pilot, or get a rating or another certificate, or even become a CFI.